The Hells Angels biker found the little girl forced into a delivery van, and his answer terrified every driver nearby. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The streets of downtown were quiet, the usual hum of traffic muffled by the heavy rain that began falling earlier that evening. It was the kind of night when nothing seemed to be right, when the cold air clung to your skin and the lights of the city reflected off the wet pavement, making everything look almost unreal. Jake Reaper Morrison, a member of the Hells Angels, leaned against his motorcycle, his leather jacket creaking as he adjusted his gloves. The storm was getting worse, and he wasn't in the mood to deal with the chaos of the weather, but his instincts had been itching all night. The streets were too empty, too still. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Just as he was about to rev the engine and ride off into the night, a flash of movement caught his eye. A white delivery van, parked just down the street, had its doors open, and a man was forcibly pulling a young girl inside. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. Her arms flailed, and she screamed, but the man was stronger. Jake's heart raced. Without thinking, he kicked the stand of his bike, pulling his helmet tighter and storming toward the scene. He knew he had to act fast. This wasn't just some petty street fight. Something much worse was happening. As he approached, the girl's desperate cries grew louder. She was fighting with everything she had, but it was clear she was no match for the man dragging her into the van. Jake's eyes locked onto the man, bigger than him, but not fast enough. "Hey!" Jake yelled, his voice booming through the storm. The man froze, momentarily distracted by the sudden presence of the Hells Angels member. That was all Jake needed. He took a step forward, his boots slapping against the wet pavement, and with one swift move, shoved the man back with all his strength. The man stumbled and turned, glaring at Jake with fury in his eyes. "What the hell do you want, biker?" the man spat. Jake didn't say a word. His fist came down like a hammer, connecting with the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The man went down, dazed, and that was when the girl stopped struggling. She froze, her wide eyes staring at Jake as if she didn't know whether to run or thank him. Jake crouched down to her level, his face softening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone with his reputation. The girl looked at him, her tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "It's okay, you're safe now," Jake said, taking a step back to give her space. He stood up and turned toward the van, taking a moment to check if there was any sign of the man's accomplices. The van was empty now, its doors swinging in the wind. He looked back at the girl, who was still standing frozen, her body shaking with fear. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. The girl nodded, but she couldn't find the strength to move. Jake sighed. He didn't have time for this. He couldn't just leave her standing in the rain, alone and vulnerable. He walked toward her and, without asking, gently scooped her up into his arms. "Let's get you somewhere safe," he muttered, his mind racing. As he carried her toward his bike, the weight of what had just happened hit him. He had no idea what kind of trouble this girl was involved in, or who the hell that man was, but he couldn't let it go. Not this time. The storm was picking up again, and the wind howled around them as Jake revved the engine of his bike. He glanced at the girl, now holding onto him tightly, her small frame shivering against the cold. It was clear she wasn't just scared of the man. There was something more to her fear. But for now, the only thing that mattered was getting her out of there. The ride to his place would take only a few minutes. But in that time, Jake knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something that was going to change everything. Jake sped down the wet road, his Harley roaring through the rain, the girl clutching tightly to his back. The storm was relentless, but there was no time to think about the weather. He had to get her somewhere safe. As they reached the outskirts of town, the rain began to fall harder, and Jake's mind raced. Who was that man? What did he want with the girl? And why had she been in that van in the first place? The questions gnawed at him, but for now, the only thing that mattered was getting her out of the storm. The small, makeshift cabin he called home came into view, tucked away in the woods just outside town. It wasn't much, but it was his sanctuary. He had no intention of sticking around in town longer than necessary. As Jake pulled into the driveway, he shut off the engine and helped the girl off the bike. She was shivering, her face pale from fear and the cold. He helped her inside, quickly closing the door behind them. The warmth of the small cabin felt like a welcome relief after the icy downpour. It wasn't much, but the heat from the old wood stove filled the space with a comforting glow. Jake took off his leather jacket and draped it over a chair, noticing the girl's wide eyes as she scanned the room. The space was bare, with only the essentials. An old sofa sat in the corner, the walls lined with shelves of motorcycle parts and tools, remnants of a life he'd long left behind. The girl was still holding her arms tightly around herself, her eyes flicking nervously from one corner of the room to the other. Jake sighed. He couldn't blame her. After what she'd been through, being thrown into an unfamiliar place with an unfamiliar person wasn't easy. "I know this isn't much," Jake said, his voice low and calming. "But you're safe here. You don't have to worry about him anymore." The girl didn't respond, her gaze focused on the floor. Jake took a step toward her, but she flinched, taking a step back. The sudden movement stung more than Jake expected. He wasn't used to being around people, especially not vulnerable ones. But something about her, something about the way she looked at him, made him feel protective. "What's your name?" Jake asked, his voice softer this time. The girl hesitated before speaking. "Emily," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. Jake nodded, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Emily, I'm Jake. I'm not going to hurt you." He paused, unsure of how to proceed. "Do you want something to eat? I can make you some soup or tea." Emily shook her head, still too afraid to look him in the eyes. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He hated this feeling. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. He was just helping her. But there was more to it than that, wasn't there? He could feel it. There was something in her eyes, something that told him her story was far from over. She wasn't just some runaway or random victim. She had a past. And Jake could sense it. "I know you're scared," Jake said, his tone softening even more. "But I need you to trust me, okay? I'm here to help. No one's going to hurt you." Emily's eyes flicked up to meet his, and for the first time since he'd found her, she spoke again. "Why are you helping me?" The question hung in the air, and Jake found himself at a loss for words. He wasn't used to explaining himself. He wasn't used to being asked questions like this. It was always simple: help someone move on. But this was different. Emily was different. "I don't know," Jake said finally, shaking his head. "I just couldn't let him take you. I couldn't just ride by and do nothing." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, but they were the truth. Emily studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake watched her as she settled onto the couch, her small body still trembling from the cold. The silence between them stretched on, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional thud of rain hitting the roof. Jake turned his attention to the stove, moving to heat up some soup, his mind still racing with questions. Who was after her? Why had they been chasing her? And what kind of trouble had she gotten herself into? Just then, his phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. Jake glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening when he saw the name. It was a number from the Hells Angels chapter. He answered it reluctantly. "Jake, where are you?" The voice on the other end was low and tense. "We need to talk. You're going to want to hear this." Jake's stomach churned. He didn't want to go back into the chaos of his old life, but he knew he couldn't avoid it. Not now. Not with Emily here. "I'll be there," Jake said, his voice grim. He hung up, looking back at Emily. She hadn't moved. "You need to stay here," Jake said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'll be back in a little while. Just stay inside, and don't open the door to anyone." Emily nodded, the fear still evident in her eyes. "Don't worry. I'll be back soon." With that, Jake grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, determined to find out what kind of danger Emily had brought into his life. As he rode off into the night, his mind kept returning to her eyes. She wasn't just any runaway. Something bigger was at play, and Jake was about to find out just how deep this story really went. Jake rode through the night, the roar of his Harley cutting through the thick, dark air as the road stretched before him, slick with rain. His mind wasn't on the road, though. It was on Emily. What was her story? Why had someone been chasing her? He could feel the weight of those questions pressing on him. But for now, he had to focus on what lay ahead. The call from the chapter had shaken him. The last thing he wanted was to get pulled back into the mess of his past life. But the feeling of responsibility for Emily wouldn't let him ignore it. As he approached the old warehouse on the edge of town where the Hells Angels gathered, his stomach tightened. The place looked as cold and abandoned as it felt inside. The overhead lights flickered dimly, casting long shadows against the walls as Jake pushed the door open and stepped inside. Several of the chapter members were gathered around a table, talking in low, serious voices. When they saw him enter, the conversation paused. Steele, the chapter president, looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "Jake," Steele said, his voice sharp. "Glad you could make it." Jake didn't respond immediately. He didn't have the time for small talk. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone flat. Steele took a long drag from his cigarette before answering. "We've got trouble. Word is, that girl you picked up, she's tied up in something bigger than we thought." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Steele motioned for Jake to sit, as the other members looked on. "She's not just some random victim. She's tied to a trafficking ring. We've got eyes on it, but it's deep. Real deep." Jake's blood ran cold. The idea of Emily being involved in something like that seemed impossible, but he knew better than to doubt Steele. "What are we supposed to do?" Jake asked, his jaw tight. "You're the one who found her. You've got the most skin in this game now." Steele's voice was low and dangerous. "You need to figure out how deep she's in it. And if it means going in headfirst, then you do what you have to do. This isn't just about her anymore." The room grew quiet as Jake absorbed the weight of Steele's words. He had always known that the Hells Angels operated on a code, one that involved loyalty and protection above all else. But this was different. Emily wasn't just some lost soul to be taken in. She was a link to something far darker than Jake could have imagined. "I'll figure it out," Jake said, standing up abruptly. "But if she's involved in this, it's on my terms. No one else touches her." Steele watched him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You sure about that? Once you're in, there's no turning back." Jake paused, his mind flashing back to the moment he found Emily, helpless and vulnerable in the street. No one else could deal with her. Not like he could. "I'm sure," he replied. Steele nodded slowly, as if accepting Jake's decision. "Fine. You know where to start." Jake didn't waste another second. He turned and walked out, the door creaking behind him. The ride back to the cabin felt longer than before, the rain now light but steady, tapping against his helmet like the ticking of a clock counting down. His thoughts kept swirling around Emily. What was her story? Who was after her? And why did he feel this deep, gnawing sense of duty to protect her, even if it meant diving headfirst into a mess that could tear everything apart? When he reached the cabin, he shut off the engine and headed inside. Emily was still there, sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring blankly ahead. She didn't seem to notice Jake at first, but when he entered, she looked up, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "What happened?" she asked, her voice small. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We need to talk," he said, sitting down across from her. Emily swallowed, her eyes darting around nervously. "What about?" Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're not just some random person in trouble, are you? There's more to this, isn't there?" Emily hesitated, her face falling as if she'd been caught in a lie. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jake leaned forward. "You don't have to hide from me. I'm not going to hurt you. But I need to know what's going on." Emily bit her lip, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't ask for any of this." Jake felt a wave of empathy wash over him. He reached out slowly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "It's okay, but I need you to trust me. I can help you, but you've got to tell me what's going on." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with fear. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice cracking. "I ran away. They were going to take me, sell me." Jake's heart stopped. He had been right. This was bigger than he could have imagined. But he wasn't about to let it go. Not while Emily was in his care. "You're safe now," Jake said firmly. "I won't let them take you. No one is going to hurt you again. Not while I'm here." As the words left his mouth, he knew that everything had just changed. The quiet, isolated life he had tried to build for himself was gone. And now, he was on the front lines of a battle that would take everything he had. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when she was counting on him. Jake sat in the small cabin, his fingers running over the handle of the mug in his hands. but his mind was miles away. Emily was still sitting across from him, her small form curled up tightly on the couch. She looked so young, fragile, but behind her eyes was a storm of fear and pain that Jake couldn't ignore. The storm outside had settled, but the tension inside the cabin was palpable. Emily hadn't spoken much since their conversation earlier. Jake had no idea what kind of danger they were truly up against, but he was about to find out. He stood up, pacing the room, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. Every thought about the situation weighed on him, but one thing kept coming back to him. He had to protect Emily, no matter what. He turned to her and saw her still sitting silently, her eyes focused on the ground. "Emily," Jake said softly, his voice low and gentle. "You don't have to be scared here. I've got you. But I need to know everything. What did you mean when you said they were going to sell you? Who are they?" The words hung in the air, thick with the unspoken questions that had been building between them. She hesitated for a long moment, her eyes flicking up to meet his. He could see the fear in them, but there was something else too, a hesitation to tell him everything. Jake could feel the walls she had built around herself, but he also knew they wouldn't come down easily. I ran away," Emily whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "My dad, he's involved with some bad people. And they were going to," her voice trailed off, breaking under the weight of the words. Jake could see how much it hurt her to say it, but he needed the truth, no matter how hard it was to hear. He stepped forward, sitting down next to her. "I'm not going anywhere," Jake said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Whatever you're hiding, whatever's going on, we're in this together now." Emily looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Jake saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. "They were going to sell me to a group. I don't know who they were, but my dad owed them money. Big money," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "He told me to keep quiet about it. He said I was the only thing he had left to give them." Jake's jaw clenched. It wasn't just a random act of violence. This was something deeper, something connected to people who operated in the shadows. He could feel the anger rising within him, the desire to do something, anything, to fix this. "And your dad," Jake said slowly. "Where is he now?" Emily shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know. He's disappeared. 1 minute, he was there, and the next, he was gone. I think he's in hiding. But I don't know if that's because he's scared or if he's just trying to escape what he got us into." Jake sat in silence, taking in her words. He had seen his share of dangerous people, but he had never encountered anything like this. Whoever was behind this, whoever her father had gotten involved with, they weren't just going to walk away. They would come looking for her, and when they did, they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up. This wasn't just about protecting Emily anymore. This was about keeping her safe from a group of people who would stop at nothing to get her back. He stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the darkened woods. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy. He knew he had to act. Emily was the only one who could help him understand this mess, but she had already been through enough. He couldn't ask her to do more, but that didn't mean he couldn't take action on his own. "You stay here," Jake said, turning back to her. "I'm going to find out who's behind this. I'm going to get answers, and I'm going to make sure they never come for you again." Emily stood up, her face pale but determined. "Jake, please," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're up against. They're not just some small-time criminals. They're dangerous." Jake looked at her, his expression hardening. "I've been in situations like this before," he said. "You think I'm afraid of dangerous people? No. I'm going to fix this, Emily. I promise you." She met his gaze, and for a moment, Jake saw the fear in her eyes give way to something else. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was trust, but whatever it was, it made him believe that he could do this. He could protect her. "I won't let them hurt you," Jake said, his voice firm. He walked toward the door, his mind already working through a plan. He had to find the people behind this. And when he did, they would learn the hard way that no one messed with someone under his protection. As he stepped out into the night, the weight of the world seemed to settle onto his shoulders. But Jake didn't flinch. He was used to carrying burdens. He was used to fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And Emily would not be another victim. Not if he could help it. Jake stepped out into the cool night air, his mind already working through the details of the situation. Emily's words echoed in his head, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here than just a desperate father and a trafficking ring. Whoever was behind this, they weren't just criminals looking to make money. No, these people were dangerous. They were calculating. Jake tightened his grip on the handlebars of his Harley as he started the engine, the low rumble filling the silence of the woods surrounding the cabin. He had no idea where to begin, but the thought of Emily, sitting alone inside, waiting for him to fix this, pushed him forward. As he roared down the road, his mind raced. Emily had said she didn't know who these people were, but Jake knew that if he dug deep enough, he would find out. He had dealt with criminals before, but nothing had ever felt like this. This was personal. This wasn't just about money or power. These people had made it personal the moment they decided to hurt Emily. Jake's bike cut through the night, the wind whipping past his face as he thought about his next move. He needed information. He needed to know who he was dealing with before he could make a plan. His first stop was the old warehouse, the one the Hells Angels used for meetings. It was the last place he wanted to be, but it was also the first place that could give him answers. When Jake pulled up, he was met with the usual darkened windows and the unmistakable scent of motor oil that always hung in the air. As he dismounted, he took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anger that had been building up inside him since he'd first found Emily. This was it. There was no turning back now. Steele, the chapter president, was waiting for him outside. He had the look of a man who had seen it all, a tough exterior hiding years of experience with people who lived on the edge of society. "Jake," Steele said, his tone sharp as always. "You look like you've got something on your mind." Jake didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need information. The girl I picked up, her father's involved with some bad people. I need to know who they are." Steele didn't say anything for a moment, his eyes studying Jake carefully. "You sure you want to go down this road, Jake?" he asked, his voice lowering. "These people aren't your average criminals. They've got connections, and once you start digging, there's no stopping them." Jake nodded, his face hardening. "I don't care. She's not going to be another victim. I need to find out who they are, and I need to make sure they can't hurt her again." Steele sighed, clearly weighing his options. "All right," he said finally. "We've been keeping an eye on a few organizations around here. There's a group that's been moving in on territory, trying to take control of the drug trade, the underground deals, all that. They've been working with some serious people. I think they're the ones who've got her." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He'd suspected it, but hearing it from Steele made it feel too real. "Who are they?" Jake asked, his voice tight. Steele hesitated again, but finally spoke. "They call themselves the Black Vultures. They've been growing in power, taking over everything they can. They don't care about who they hurt, as long as they get what they want." Jake's fists clenched at his sides. The name sent a chill through him. The Black Vultures were known for one thing. They didn't just deal in drugs. They dealt in fear, in pain, in taking everything from their victims until they had nothing left to give. And now they had Emily in their sights. "How do I find them?" Jake asked, his voice steady, though the anger inside him was rising. Steele gave him a hard look, then motioned to one of the members standing nearby. "I've got a contact. He's been working with them on the inside. He'll be able to give you the details you need. But be careful, Jake. These people don't play by the rules. And if they find out you're coming for them, they'll make sure you don't get the chance to take them down." Jake didn't flinch. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Emily, not while he was still breathing. He grabbed the contact information Steele handed him and turned to leave. "I'll take care of it," he said over his shoulder, his voice filled with determination. Steele didn't try to stop him. "Just don't say I didn't warn you," Steele called after him. But Jake was already heading out the door, back to his bike. As he rode through the night, his mind was focused on one thing: making sure the Black Vultures never got their hands on Emily again. He had no idea what he was walking into, but one thing was for sure. He was going to fight with everything he had. When he arrived at the contact's place, a rundown bar on the outskirts of town, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. The man was waiting for him, his face shadowed under the brim of his hat. "You Jake?" the man asked, his voice gruff. Jake nodded. "I need to know everything about the Black Vultures." The man took a long drag from his cigarette before responding. "You're in deep, my friend. But I'll tell you what you need to know." The information came fast and hard. The Black Vultures had a stronghold in a warehouse by the docks. They were running more than just drugs. They were running a human trafficking ring. And they weren't planning to stop until they had complete control over everything. Jake's blood boiled as he listened, the images in his mind growing darker with each passing second. "Where is she?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but filled with intensity. The man paused, then looked Jake in the eye. "She's there. But you need to be careful. They'll be expecting you." Jake didn't say anything else. He turned on his heel and walked out, his mind set. He was about to walk into the lion's den. But this time, the lion wasn't going to win. Jake's knuckles were white as he gripped the handlebars of his Harley, the rumble of the engine drowning out the storm that was picking up again. His thoughts raced as he headed towards the old warehouse by the docks. The night air was thick with tension, but Jake was beyond the point of hesitation. He knew what he had to do. The contact's words echoed in his mind. The Black Vultures weren't just a threat. They were a well-oiled machine, and they had made it personal the moment they tried to take Emily. As Jake approached the warehouse, the sight of the looming, rusted structure sent a shiver down his spine. The place was isolated, dark, and quiet, too quiet for a place that was supposed to be a hub for a criminal organization. He slowed the bike to a stop, his eyes scanning the perimeter. It was a familiar feeling. Jake had walked into dangerous places before, but this one felt different. He wasn't just here to intimidate or fight. This time, he was here to put an end to it. He parked the bike behind a stack of crates, his boots hitting the wet ground with a soft thud. The docks were deserted at this hour, the only sounds coming from the wind and the occasional distant clink of metal against metal. Jake moved toward the entrance of the warehouse, his instincts sharp, scanning every corner. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for him to slip inside without drawing attention. He paused for a moment, listening for any signs of movement. The faint sound of voices came from deeper inside the warehouse. Jake took a breath, then entered, his footsteps silent but deliberate as he moved through the shadows. He could see the faint glow of lights further down the hall, and the voices grew louder. As he got closer, he spotted several figures gathered around a table. The men were talking in low, hushed tones, unaware of his presence. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but his training kept him focused. He needed to find Emily and get her out, and he couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Slowly, Jake crept forward, staying low and keeping to the shadows. As he rounded the corner, his eyes locked onto a scene that made his blood run cold. Emily was there, sitting on a chair in the center of the room. Her hands were bound to the chair, her face bruised, but her eyes still held a flicker of defiance. Standing around her were a few men, their faces obscured by masks, but their presence unmistakably threatening. One of them was speaking into a phone, and Jake could hear snippets of the conversation. "We'll have her moved by morning," the man said. "They'll pay. They always pay." Jake's anger flared. He had to act, but he needed to wait for the right moment. His mind worked quickly, assessing the room. There were 2 guards standing near Emily, but they weren't paying much attention to her. He could take them out quickly, but it needed to be clean. He wasn't just rescuing Emily. He was making sure they never hurt anyone else again. As the man on the phone finished his call and hung up, Jake saw his chance. With one swift move, he pulled out his gun and fired 2 quick shots into the overhead light, plunging the room into darkness. The sound of the gunshots echoed in the warehouse, but it didn't matter. The element of surprise was on his side. He moved fast, his boots hitting the ground in a sprint as he rushed toward the guards. The first man never saw him coming. Jake tackled him to the ground, knocking him out cold with a well-placed punch to the jaw. The second guard turned just in time to see Jake's fist coming at him. He didn't stand a chance. With both guards down, Jake rushed over to Emily. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear, but there was something else there, something like hope. "Jake?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe he was really there. "Yeah, it's me," Jake said, his voice low but reassuring. He worked quickly, cutting through the ropes that bound her wrists. "We're getting out of here." Emily winced as the ropes were pulled free, but she didn't say anything. Jake helped her stand, his arms supporting her as she struggled to find her balance. "You're safe now," Jake said firmly, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of more danger. But he knew they weren't out of the woods yet. They had to move fast. The sound of footsteps approached, and Jake turned, his instincts kicking in. The man who had been on the phone earlier appeared. In the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he spotted them. "What the hell?" he hissed, reaching for a gun holstered at his side. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her behind him, shielding her with his body as he drew his own weapon. "Not a step closer," Jake warned, his voice low and deadly. The man hesitated for a moment, then raised his gun. Jake fired first, the sound of the shot ringing out as the man collapsed to the ground. Emily gasped, but Jake didn't have time to explain. He pulled her toward the back door, his heart racing as they made their way through the warehouse. They had to get out before more of them showed up. They weren't safe yet. As they reached the exit, Jake heard the sound of motorcycles revving outside. It wasn't just the Black Vultures, they were being followed. The chase was just beginning. Jake's heart raced as he pulled Emily through the back door of the warehouse, the dim light from the streetlights outside barely illuminating their path. He could hear the unmistakable roar of motorcycles in the distance, getting closer, and he knew that their window of safety was rapidly closing. They had no time to waste. The Black Vultures were coming, and they weren't going to stop until they had her back. He helped Emily climb into the back of a rusty van he had found earlier, the only vehicle available. The engine sputtered to life with a loud cough, but it held steady as Jake slammed the gear shift into drive. Emily was breathing heavily beside him, still trying to process what had just happened. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the van. She nodded, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. He reached over and gently placed his hand on hers, offering whatever comfort he could. "We'll be safe soon," he said, trying to reassure her, even though he wasn't sure if he believed the words himself. As he turned onto the road, Jake glanced in the rearview mirror. The sight of headlights closing in on them only confirmed what he already knew. They were being followed. The Black Vultures weren't going to let them slip away that easily. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had to lose them. He had to get Emily out of here, away from these people who wanted to use her for something far worse. He swerved the van onto a dirt road, the tires kicking up gravel as the van slid sideways. The motorcycles behind them followed, their headlights glaring through the darkness, cutting through the night like a pair of hunting wolves. Jake pushed the van harder, taking corners too fast, feeling the vehicle shift under him. He wasn't a professional driver, but he had done enough reckless things in his life to know how to handle a situation like this. "Hold on tight," he shouted to Emily, who gripped the seat, her knuckles white from the strain. The sound of roaring engines behind them was deafening now. Jake could see the glow of their headlights getting closer in the rear view. The Black Vultures weren't far behind. He knew they were only moments away from being caught, and it wouldn't be long before they found a way to stop the van. He turned onto another road, a narrow, winding path that led deeper into the woods. The van bumped over the uneven terrain, and Jake could feel the engine straining as he pushed it to its limits. He glanced at Emily once more. "Stay down, and don't make a sound," he ordered. She nodded, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. She was just a kid, dragged into something she didn't understand, something she didn't deserve. And now, it was up to him to protect her. The headlights of the motorcycles were still on their tail, but the trees were starting to thicken, offering some cover. Jake's only chance was to outrun them. He hit the gas pedal, the van's engine roaring as it surged forward. He could see the headlights behind him start to fade, the motorcycles struggling to keep up with the rough terrain. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jake made a hard right turn and drove deeper into the woods, the sound of the motorcycles fading away as they lost ground. He had to be sure they were safe. He couldn't afford to take any chances. After what felt like an eternity, Jake finally slowed the van to a stop. He pulled into a small clearing, hidden from the road by a dense wall of trees. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, his body shaking with adrenaline. "We lost them," Jake said, his voice hoarse. Emily looked up at him, her face pale but relieved. "Are they gone?" she asked quietly. Jake nodded, though he knew they weren't completely out of danger. The Black Vultures wouldn't give up so easily. "For now," he said, his voice steadying. He turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, trying to catch his breath. They were safe for the moment, but Jake knew they couldn't stay here long. He turned to Emily, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to keep moving," he said. "We need to find somewhere safe for you. Somewhere they can't find you." Emily nodded, but she didn't speak. Jake could see the exhaustion on her face, the weight of everything that had happened settling in. "You're doing great," Jake said softly. "We'll get through this. I won't let them hurt you." Emily gave him a small, tired smile, and Jake could see a glimmer of trust in her eyes. She had been through so much, but in that moment, she believed in him. And that was all that mattered. Jake knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous. The Black Vultures wouldn't rest until they got what they wanted. But as long as Jake was breathing, they weren't going to take Emily. Not without a fight. Jake and Emily sat in the quiet of the woods, the only sound now the distant chirping of crickets and the soft rustling of leaves. The van was still, its engine cold now, the adrenaline from their escape slowly starting to wear off. Emily had fallen asleep, her head resting against the seat as the exhaustion from the night's events took its toll on her. Jake kept watch, his eyes scanning the darkness around them, his mind still racing. They had to keep moving, but where? The Black Vultures were relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they found out that Emily was still alive. Jake couldn't let that happen. He needed a plan, but for now, the most important thing was keeping Emily safe. He couldn't afford to lose her, not after everything she'd been through. He rubbed a hand over his face, trying to clear the fog from his mind. The exhaustion was starting to creep in for him, too, but he couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. The night had given him a brief respite, but Jake knew it was just the calm before the storm. He needed answers. He needed to find out who was behind all of this. And, more importantly, he needed to figure out how to end it once and for all. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was a road he was willing to walk if it meant protecting Emily. He glanced over at her. She was still asleep, her face soft and peaceful for the first time in what seemed like forever. Jake knew that the second she woke up, the fear would return. He couldn't let her go back to the life she had before. It wasn't right. He didn't know how he was going to do it yet, but Jake was determined to give her a future. As he sat there, a flash of movement caught his eye. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. It was probably nothing, but Jake wasn't about to take any chances. He scanned the tree line, his heart pounding as the sound of footsteps approached. His mind raced. Was it the Black Vultures? Or just someone else out here in the woods? He didn't have much time to think. The footsteps were getting closer. He had to act fast. He gently nudged Emily, trying not to wake her too quickly. "Emily," he whispered, his voice low and calm. "Wake up. We have to move." Her eyes fluttered open, her brow furrowing in confusion as she blinked against the darkness. "What's going on?" she mumbled, still half asleep. Jake's voice was urgent but steady. "I need you to stay quiet and follow me. We can't stay here." Emily nodded, her body tensing as the reality of the situation hit her. Jake didn't wait for another word. He grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the van, leading her toward the trees, moving quickly and quietly. The footsteps were now just behind them, and Jake's mind raced. He had to get her out of sight before whoever was coming got too close. The last thing he wanted was to have another confrontation. Not here, not now. He guided Emily through the thick underbrush, his eyes darting around as he tried to find a safe spot to hide. He heard the sound of voices now, men's voices, closer than before. It was too late to run. He had to face whatever was coming, but he had to protect Emily first. They came to a small clearing, hidden from the path behind them by the dense trees and bushes. Jake crouched down behind a large rock, pulling Emily down beside him. She was shaking, her breath quick and shallow, but she stayed silent. Jake could feel her fear, but he kept his voice steady. "We'll be okay. Just stay low and don't make a sound," he whispered. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Jake turned his attention back to the path. The men were getting closer, their voices louder now. He could hear them talking, but the words were muffled by the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. "Where is she?" one of the men asked, his voice angry and demanding. Jake's heart skipped a beat. They were looking for her. They couldn't find her. Not now. He gripped the gun tighter, his knuckles white with the tension. He didn't know who these men were, but they weren't going to take Emily. Not on his watch. The voices grew closer, but still, Jake and Emily remained hidden, breathing as quietly as they could manage. Jake's heart raced, every second stretching longer than the last. He had to be ready to act. The men were only a few feet away now, their footsteps unmistakable on the dry ground. Jake's mind raced, calculating the best move. He could hear their voices now. "She has to be around here somewhere," one of the men said. She couldn't have gone far. Jake could feel Emily's hand trembling in his, and he squeezed it gently to reassure her. "Don't worry. Stay calm," he whispered. Just as the men passed by, Jake waited for a moment, and then, without hesitation, he pulled Emily to her feet and started to move again. This was their chance. They had to get further away, and they had to do it fast. He led her deeper into the woods, away from the men who were still searching. They moved quietly, staying off the path and weaving between the trees, until the voices grew distant. Only when the sounds of pursuit faded into the background did Jake slow his pace. He looked at Emily, who was breathing heavily, her face pale but determined. They had made it through this, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. They weren't safe yet. The Black Vultures were still out there, and they would keep coming until they had what they wanted. But Jake wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Jake and Emily had been moving through the woods for what seemed like hours, each step taking them further away from the danger they had narrowly escaped. The air was heavy with tension, but they couldn't stop yet. Not until they were far enough from the Black Vultures, and not until Jake was certain they were out of harm's way. The night had turned colder, and Emily was shivering despite her efforts to keep up with Jake. Her feet dragged with exhaustion, and Jake could see how badly the events were taking their toll on her. He felt the same weight, but he had to stay strong. He had to protect her. "You okay?" Jake asked, glancing back at her. Emily gave him a weak smile, but he could tell it was forced. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice wavered. Jake didn't believe her, but he didn't push. Instead, he slowed his pace, allowing her to catch up. "We're almost there," he said, his voice low but reassuring. The last few miles had been tough, navigating the thick woods and keeping their movement quiet, but Jake knew a safe house not far from here. It belonged to an old friend, a man who owed Jake a favor. They had to reach it before dawn. As they moved forward, the forest began to thin out, the trees becoming sparse as they neared the edge of the woods. Jake's heart pounded as they approached the clearing. The safe house was just beyond the tree line, a secluded cabin hidden from view, but the sense of safety it brought was overshadowed by the looming threat behind them. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't out of danger yet. They couldn't stop now. Emily's breath had become shallow, her chest rising and falling in quick bursts. She wasn't used to running. She wasn't used to any of this. "Just a little farther," Jake urged, glancing back to make sure no one had followed them. The coast seemed clear for now, but he knew that could change in an instant. They reached the cabin just as the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. Jake pushed the door open quietly, ushering Emily inside. The cabin was small, but it was a safe haven. It was a place Jake had used before, a place that could shield them for a little while. He locked the door behind them and immediately went to the window, peering out into the growing daylight. They weren't out of the woods yet. Jake knew the Black Vultures would be searching for them, and if they were smart, they would track them here. He needed a plan. "You should rest," Jake said, turning to Emily. "I'll keep watch." Emily nodded but didn't say anything. She collapsed onto the worn couch, exhaustion finally taking its toll. Jake moved to the small kitchen area, grabbing a bottle of water and bringing it to her. He wasn't sure what to say. He didn't know if anything he could say would make her feel better. This wasn't just about saving her anymore. This was about survival. It was about making sure no one else got hurt. Emily took the water from him with a shaky hand. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jake sat down beside her, his face softening. He didn't know what to say either. He hadn't asked for this either. But here they were. "No one ever does," Jake said quietly. "But I'll make sure you're safe. No one's going to hurt you again." Emily leaned against the back of the couch, her eyes looking distant. Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. He could see how deeply it had affected her. She was just a kid. She shouldn't have to be caught up in something like this. She shouldn't have to be running from people who would hurt her. But Jake knew that's what made him different. He wasn't going to back down. Not this time. As the minutes passed, Jake remained alert, his senses on high. He couldn't relax, not until he knew for sure that they were safe. He needed to figure out where the Black Vultures were hiding, and he needed to act fast before they could regroup and come after them again. He couldn't risk it. "I'm going to make a few calls," Jake said, standing up and heading toward the back of the cabin. "I'll get some answers." Emily didn't respond, but Jake could feel her eyes on him. He knew she was scared. They both were. But he wasn't going to let her face this alone. As he pulled out his phone, Jake's mind raced with possibilities. He had friends and places that could help. He had people who owed him favors. But it wasn't just about calling in favors anymore. It was about ending this, once and for all. As he dialed the number, his mind flashed back to the night he had found Emily. That moment when everything had changed. He hadn't planned on getting involved, but now he couldn't walk away. Not after everything she had been through. Not after everything they both had been through. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Jake?" The voice on the other end asked. "It's me," Jake replied. "I need help. I'm looking for a place where the Black Vultures are hiding. You have any intel?" The voice paused, then responded, "I've got a lead. I'll send you the address." Jake felt the tension in his chest loosen just a bit. This was the break he needed. The moment they had all been waiting for. But even as the words left his mouth, a cold shiver ran down his spine. They weren't done yet. The real fight was just beginning. Jake hung up the phone with a quiet sigh, the weight of the conversation still heavy in his chest. The lead he'd just received might be the break they needed, but something in the back of his mind told him that the worst was yet to come. He glanced over at Emily, who was still sitting on the couch, her face etched with exhaustion and fear. She hadn't said much since they arrived at the cabin, but Jake could tell she was holding something back. Something more than just the fear of being hunted by the Black Vultures. She was fighting with something deeper. He walked over to her, sitting down beside her. "Hey," he said softly. "We've got a lead. We're going to move again soon." Emily nodded, but Jake could see the hesitation in her eyes. "What's going on?" he asked gently, not wanting to push her, but knowing something was weighing on her. Emily bit her lip, avoiding his gaze. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She exhaled sharply as if fighting back tears. "I'm scared," she whispered. Jake's heart clenched. He had known she was scared, but hearing it from her, he hadn't realized just how much fear she was holding inside. "I know," he said, his voice low. "But you're not alone. I'm here." She looked at him then, her eyes filled with pain. "You don't get it," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't keep running. I'm tired. I'm so tired." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. This wasn't just about running from the Black Vultures. It was about Emily's soul, about what they had both endured to get this far. "I know you're tired," Jake said quietly. "But we don't stop until we're safe." "I won't stop." Emily looked away, her gaze distant. Jake knew she didn't believe him. Not fully. Not yet. But he wasn't going to give up on her. Not when she needed him the most. "I promise," he added, his voice steady. "We're going to make it through this. Together." He stood up then, his eyes scanning the cabin. They couldn't stay here long. The Black Vultures would be looking for them, and Jake wasn't going to risk Emily's safety by lingering in one place for too long. He pulled on his jacket, walking toward the window and peering out at the darkened woods. The faintest glow of dawn was just beginning to break through the trees, but Jake knew that time was running out. The Black Vultures were on the hunt. They wouldn't give up until they had Emily back, and that wasn't an option. He turned back to her. "Stay here. I'm going to make sure we have everything we need. We can't waste any more time." Emily nodded, though Jake could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. As he made his way to the door, he felt her gaze follow him. "Be careful," she called after him, her voice quiet, but full of concern. Jake paused, glancing back at her, and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I will," he said. The door closed behind him, and Jake stepped outside, his boots crunching against the gravel as he moved toward the van. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. It was a fresh start, but Jake knew that it wasn't enough. The storm wasn't over yet. The Black Vultures were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Jake had learned long ago that people like them didn't play by the rules. And for all the good that Jake had tried to do in his life, sometimes the only way to fight was to fight dirty. He wasn't about to let Emily become another victim. He started the van, the engine growling to life, and pulled out of the clearing, making his way toward the address Steele had given him. The road stretched ahead, and Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. This was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for redemption, for Emily's future, and for his own. He had made mistakes in the past, and he wasn't proud of them. But he had a chance now to make things right. He wouldn't fail her. He couldn't. As the van bounced over the uneven road, Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced down at it, but it wasn't a number he recognized. He picked it up anyway. "Jake." The voice on the other end was distorted, and there was a faint hiss of static. "Who is this?" Jake asked, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "You've been busy, haven't you?" The voice continued, the words coming in quick, clipped bursts. "I know what you're doing. You can't hide from us forever." Jake's pulse quickened. It was one of them. A threat. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp. "We want her back," the voice said simply. "And if you don't want things to get worse, you'll bring her to us." Jake's jaw tightened. "I'm not giving her up. Not now, not ever." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the voice chuckled darkly. "We'll see about that," it said, before the line went dead. Jake threw the phone down, his mind racing. They were getting closer. The Black Vultures weren't going to stop. And neither was he. Jake's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, the words from the mysterious caller still ringing in his ears. "We want her back." It was a threat, plain and simple. He knew they weren't going to let up. The Black Vultures were a dangerous bunch, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. His mind raced as he drove down the winding road, his headlights cutting through the morning fog. Emily was in danger, and he couldn't allow anyone to hurt her. Not after everything they'd been through. He had to make this right. The cabin was behind them now, a place of temporary safety that couldn't protect them forever. The Black Vultures were relentless, and Jake could feel the pressure mounting with every passing second. His phone buzzed again, and for a moment, he thought it might be the Black Vultures calling back, demanding to know where Emily was. He glanced at the screen, his stomach tightening when he saw the name, Steele. He hesitated, then answered the call. "Jake." Steele's voice came through, sharp and direct. "I know you're on the move, but we've got a bigger problem. The Black Vultures are starting to make their move. They've been making calls, contacting people who might know where you are." Jake's grip tightened on the wheel. He wasn't surprised. He had known this was coming. "I'm heading to the place you told me about," Jake said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "I need to get to them before they get to her." Steele didn't waste time with small talk. "You need to be careful. They're not messing around. We've had people watching their movements, and they're gearing up for something big. If you can, get to them before they can take action. We don't know how many people they have on the ground." Jake's mind immediately started working, running through all the possible scenarios. He couldn't waste any time. "I'll make sure I'm ready," he said, his voice firm. "I won't let them take her." Steele paused for a moment, then spoke again, his tone quieter. "Jake, this isn't just about Emily anymore. It's bigger than that. The Black Vultures have connections with people who can make this whole thing disappear. If you're not careful, they'll drag you down with them." Jake didn't answer right away. He knew exactly what Steele was saying. The Black Vultures were dangerous not just because of their power, but because of who they knew. People in high places who could make things vanish, who could make people disappear without a trace. But Jake wasn't afraid. "Not now. I've got to go. I'll handle it," he said, cutting the conversation short. He hung up, the weight of his next move pressing down on him. He didn't have time to think too much about it. He had to find the Vultures. As Jake drove further into the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had to find Emily's father. He had to understand what had dragged her into all this mess. There was a reason why the Black Vultures were after her, and Jake needed answers. He pulled up to an abandoned warehouse, the address Steele had given him. It looked like any other rundown building in the area, dark, neglected, forgotten. But Jake knew better. This place was hiding something, and he was about to uncover it. He parked the van at the edge of the lot and checked his gun, making sure it was secure. He stepped out of the van, his boots crunching on the gravel as he moved toward the entrance. Every sense was on high alert. He knew that the Vultures would be expecting him. He wasn't going to be able to sneak in and out. No, this was going to be a fight. As he approached the warehouse, he took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the sound of creaking metal filling the empty space. The inside was dimly lit, with scattered boxes and old crates littering the floor. The air smelled of dust and mildew, but there was something else, something more sinister hanging in the air. Jake moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the shadows. He could hear voices in the distance, the low murmur of men talking, their words muffled by the walls. He couldn't make out everything they were saying, but he knew they were getting closer. He ducked behind a stack of crates and waited, listening for any sounds that would give him a clue about where Emily might be. The last thing he wanted was to walk into an ambush. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Jake tensed, ready for whatever came next. The door at the far end of the warehouse creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black leather jacket with the unmistakable logo of the Black Vultures on his back. The man looked around, his eyes scanning the dark room. Jake didn't hesitate. He moved swiftly, silently, drawing his gun and aiming it at the man. "Don't move," Jake growled, his voice low and dangerous. The man froze, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon at his side. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his voice gruff. Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for the man to stay still. "Where is she?" Jake demanded. The man smirked, then slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. "You're too late," the man said, pressing a button. Jake's heart skipped again. "What did you just do?" he barked, his finger tightening on the trigger. The man's smirk grew wider. "She's already gone," he said, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Jake's blood ran cold. "No," he shouted, charging forward. But the man was already gone, disappearing into the shadows before Jake could react. The game had just changed. They weren't just looking for Emily anymore. Now, they were looking for him. And this time, it was personal. Jake stood frozen in the dimly lit warehouse, the echo of the man's words hanging in the air like a weight he couldn't shake. "She's already gone." The man had pressed that damn button, and the cold realization hit Jake like a sledgehammer. Emily had been moved. The Black Vultures had her again. And this time, they'd made sure he couldn't stop them. His mind raced as he scanned the empty warehouse. No sign of the man. No sign of Emily. He cursed under his breath, frustration boiling over. This was a mistake he couldn't afford. They weren't just toying with him anymore. They were playing for keeps, and Jake had just walked into their trap. His hand tightened around the grip of his gun, but there was nothing left to shoot at. He had no lead. No way of knowing where Emily had been taken. He couldn't believe this was happening. He couldn't let them win. Not like this. He turned and sprinted for the door, his boots slamming against the concrete floor. He had to get to the van. He had to get back to the cabin. Maybe there was a clue he'd missed. Maybe he could still find her. Jake threw open the door of the van, slamming it shut behind him as he sped down the road. The rain started to pick up again, falling in heavy sheets that blurred the road in front of him. He could barely see through the windshield, but he kept driving, the engine roaring beneath him as if it could outrun his thoughts. The Black Vultures had her again, and Jake wasn't about to let them win. He couldn't let them. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He looked down at the screen. Steele. He had to answer. "Jake," Steele's voice crackled through the speaker, urgent. "Where are you?" Jake's grip tightened on the wheel. "I'm on the move. They've got her again. The Black Vultures, they set me up." Steele's voice was filled with disbelief. "What do you mean they set you up?" Jake's knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel. "They moved her. The guy I was after, he set off some sort of signal, and now she's gone. I don't know where they took her, but I'm not stopping until I find her." Steele was silent for a moment, and then he spoke. "Jake, listen to me. This is bigger than you think. They're pulling in all their people, tightening the noose around you. You can't do this alone." Jake shook his head, his jaw clenched. "I don't have a choice." The phone clicked, and Steele's voice was replaced by a steady beeping, signaling the end of the call. Jake didn't bother calling back. He didn't need anyone's help. What he needed was to find Emily. The city lights blurred in the rain as Jake kept driving, pushing himself to the edge of his nerves, searching for a place he could think. He needed a plan. The Black Vultures weren't going to back off, and Jake knew he had to be smarter than ever if he was going to outsmart them. The longer it took, the harder it would be to get Emily out of their grasp. And he couldn't afford to waste time. He drove aimlessly for a while, his mind running through every possibility. They couldn't have gotten too far. They'd made sure to keep Emily close, knowing that Jake would come for her. It was the only reason he was still alive. They wanted him to come. And now they had him exactly where they wanted him. The city wasn't safe. Jake knew that. He needed to find a place where he could think, plan, regroup. That's when he remembered the old mechanic shop, the one he used to visit for repairs. It was run by a friend of his, someone who owed him a favor. If anyone knew where to find the Black Vultures, it would be him. He slammed the van into gear and made his way across the city. The rain was relentless, but Jake couldn't afford to slow down. He needed answers, and the mechanic might have them. When Jake arrived, he didn't waste any time knocking. He banged his fist against the door, the sound echoing in the dark alley. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing an older man with graying hair and a weathered face. "Jake," the mechanic said, his voice low and cautious. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jake didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the cluttered shop. "I need information. I'm looking for the Black Vultures. I've got a girl there after, and I need to know where they've taken her." The mechanic's eyes narrowed. "I don't want any part of this, Jake. Those guys, they don't mess around." Jake's eyes hardened. "I don't care what they mess around with. I'm not leaving here until you tell me what I need to know." The mechanic sighed, stepping back and gesturing for Jake to follow. "All right," he muttered. "I know where they hide out. But you're asking for trouble, Jake. Those people aren't just criminals. They've got people in high places, and they'll come down on you hard if they think you're a threat." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't care. I'm getting her back." The mechanic looked at him for a long moment before reaching into his drawer and pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. "This is where you'll find them," he said, handing Jake the paper. Jake took it without hesitation. "Thanks," he said, turning on his heel and heading for the door. The mechanic's voice stopped him. "Jake, don't do something stupid." Jake didn't look back. He had already made up his mind. Emily was counting on him, and no matter what it took, he was going to bring her home. He wasn't going to let anyone take her again, not while he was still standing. Jake stood at the edge of the warehouse, the faint light of dawn breaking through the cracks in the walls. The paper in. His hand felt heavier than ever, the address scribbled on it pointing to the final location, the place where the Black Vultures were hiding. It had been a long journey to get here, but he wasn't about to let this moment slip through his fingers. He had made it this far, and now, it was time to finish what he had started. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain and metal, and Jake could hear the faint hum of distant motorcycles in the background. He didn't need to guess. The vultures were already on their way. They knew he was coming. They always did. But this time, Jake wasn't going to let them win. Not again. He took one last look at the paper, crumpling it into his pocket as he stepped into the building. The air inside was cold, damp, and smelled of oil and rust, a perfect reflection of what Jake knew he was about to face. His eyes scanned the room, the silence heavy in the air as he listened for any signs of movement. There was no time to waste. He had to get to Emily. He had to make sure she was safe. Jake moved cautiously through the warehouse, the weight of every step heavier than the last. He knew they were close. His instincts told him they were watching him, waiting for him to make a move. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. He wasn't going to be caught off guard again. He stopped at a corner, peeking around it to see several figures gathered around a table, their voices low and tense. The sight of them made his stomach churn. These were the people who had terrorized Emily. These were the ones who had hurt her and were willing to do whatever it took to control her. Jake gritted his teeth. No more. This time, there would be no escape for them. He raised his hand to his side, checking for the gun holstered at his waist, the cold steel of it comforting him. He wasn't about to let these men walk away from what they'd done. He moved silently through the shadows, his every move calculated, his heart beating in time with the rhythm of the room. He was ready for the fight, but there was something else he was preparing for, the moment when he would find Emily. It couldn't come soon enough. As he moved deeper into the warehouse, the voices grew louder, and Jake finally spotted her. She was tied to a chair, her head slumped forward, but she was alive. Relief surged through him like a wave, but it was short-lived. The men around her were armed, watching her closely. Jake's eyes narrowed. This was it. He had to act. "Step away from her," Jake called out, his voice cold and unwavering. The men turned, their eyes narrowing in surprise. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, one of the men stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun at his belt. "You think you can just waltz in here and take her?" the man sneered. Jake's fingers tightened on his weapon, but he didn't move. "I'm not here to ask for permission," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to take her back." The man laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You're too late. We've already made our deal." Jake's heart pounded. He wasn't about to let that stand. "I'm taking her," Jake said, his voice cutting through the air. "And you're not stopping me." The man's hand moved toward his gun, but Jake was faster. He raised his weapon and fired, the sound echoing through the empty warehouse. The shot hit the man square in the chest, and he crumpled to the ground in an instant. The other men scrambled, drawing their own weapons, but Jake was already moving. He fired 2 more quick shots, hitting his targets before they could react. The warehouse erupted into chaos, the sound of gunfire and shouts filling the air as Jake took control of the situation. But through it all, his eyes never left Emily. She was still sitting there, bound and helpless, but her eyes were wide with recognition. Jake couldn't stop now. He couldn't leave her. With one final burst of energy, Jake rushed over to her, cutting the ropes that held her in place. "You're safe now," he said, his voice soft but firm. Emily's face was pale, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. She nodded, but didn't speak. Jake helped her to her feet, his arms supporting her as they moved toward the exit. But just as they reached the door, the sound of motorcycles roaring in the distance reached Jake's ears. They were coming. He wasn't done yet. "We have to move," Jake said, pulling Emily along behind him. The vultures weren't giving up that easily. They never would. He pushed open the door, his eyes scanning the horizon. The motorcycles were closing in, but Jake wasn't backing down. He pulled Emily into the van, slamming the door behind them. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady as he started the engine. The vultures were closing in, but Jake wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Not ever. As he slammed the van into gear and sped away, the road ahead was clear. For now. But Jake knew they wouldn't stop until they had her. He had to get her out. He had to keep her safe. And he wasn't going to rest until the Black Vultures were nothing more than a memory.